NO-OBLIVION Multigenerational Debates podcast.
Welcome to this live debate. A very, very warm welcome to our guest, Vedran Džihić. My name is Sarah Vollmer, and together with my colleague, Dr. Sarah Riese, and partners from the whole consortium of the project NO-OBLIVION, we have been preparing this live debate. I will now present our guest for today's debate, Dr. Vedran Džihić, who was born in 1976, and he's originally from Prijedor in Bosnia. He lives currently in Vienna, or is living now in Vienna, and he's a senior researcher at the Austrian Institute for International Affairs, and he's a lecturer at the University of Vienna. And he has a variety of fields of research that are related to democracy and transition processes, to European integration, to civil society and protest movements, to foreign policy, to conflict research and nationalism. And he has a regional focus lying on Eastern and Southern Eastern Europe and the US. And he has published numerous books and articles in the last years, and he's contributing to national and international media. And very recently, and this is we're really happy about that, very recently in 2024, he published a book called Ankommen, Arrival in English, that brings together his personal story of arrival with a perspective on the current political situation in Austria. And we are very much looking forward to this debate, to include this book in this debate. And we will also address questions like, what does it take to really arrive somewhere and for everyone to feel at home? And how does our society deal with others? And these and other questions we're going to discuss in the live debate. And I will quickly introduce Teresa and Lea before I give the floor to them. Teresa Rauch is a master graduate in Peace and Conflict Studies at the University of Kent and the Philipps Universität Marburg, and she has different research topics she's interested in. One of them is post-conflict memorialization, gendered experience of peace and conflict, and survivor-centered transitional justice. And throughout her studies, she focused her research on the former Yugoslavia and Bosnia-Herzegovina in particular, and she wrote her master thesis on expressions of identity and belonging by the Bosnian diaspora in the DACH countries. These are Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, for those of you who don't know what that means. And Lea Kest is a student of international relations in historical perspective at the University of Utrecht and ethics and political philosophy at Radboud University in Nijmegen. And after writing her bachelor thesis on the knowledge of production surrounding the genocide of Srebrenica, she developed a strong interest in the Balkans, and her academic focus lies in exploring the intersections between international relations and philosophy, particularly in the areas of knowledge production and collective memory. And I will stop talking and give the floor to Lea and Teresa and to Vedran.
Yes. Hello, everyone. And a very warm welcome also to Vedran. And to begin with, we would like to ask you, perhaps, how did you decide to become a social scientist, working on the former Yugoslavia, particularly, and also if you could elaborate a bit more on your motivations to specialize on this area particularly.
Thank you, Lea. Thank you, Teresa. Thank you, Sarah. And thank you all, guys. You now have found time to be with us for this conversation. And I'm humbled, but also very happy that we have some time to exchange and to try to understand a bit better what has happened in the specific region of former Yugoslavia in the last 3 decades and what's happening right now as we speak in Europe, in Germany, in Austria. I'm very much under the impression of this ridiculous Trump inauguration and his speech. I'm very much under the impression of not only the rise of far right and extremist right in the country that I live in and that I call my second home. And it might be that when we come towards the end of the conversation, or throughout the conversation, that I'll need to place my memories, but my political stances, positions in this kind of current context. I think that's important as we look forward. And it's particularly important as the whole project No-OBLIVION places an emphasis on the European safeguarding European legacy of human rights and peace, which is great. But at the same time, we have political and social processes running against the legacy of what we have learned and appreciated to have human rights and peace and democracy in Europe. Anyway, but back to that's just a kind of a small intro that you know where to place me if I get too emotional and leave the position of political scientist and social scientist. But let's come back to the question. So when you ask why did I decide to first of all to deal with topics like nationalism, wars, become a social scientist, deal with my former country, former Yugoslavia, deal with memories and with the wars, I think the explanation, as it usually is the case, it's not the fate, but it's actually what happens to you and to your life as you grow up. And I grew up in a let's say a typical socialist or Yugoslav family. I was born in a family of which some later on will describe as a mixed marriage. So my father originally has roots in a Muslim family, even though he joined the Communist Party at the young age of 16. My mother comes from the Ukrainian minority in Bosnia and Herzegovina. She used to speak Ukrainian at home and go to Ukrainian church, but then started rebelling against the Ukrainian identity and this kind of a whole pressure in the small community, and also joined the Communist Party at the age of 16 and left the home at the age of 18 to spend her life with my daddy. So an unusual kind of marriage, and later on it will be described as a mixed marriage, even though I think you can't mix two people that love each other. Anyway, why I'm telling this story, so it was my family and actually my identity is a very typical product of this Yugoslav identity formation that started taking roots in the late 40s, 50s, and that's has grown to something that was not an experiment but a reality. And my whole childhood was in a way very much under the let's say under the notion of this kind of a Yugoslav spirit. So my dad would read a lot and be a member of the Communist Party, invite people. They will discuss the future of the Yugoslav socialism. They would, I mean, cry over the crisis in the 80s. They would follow the political events. I would also start reading newspapers at a very early age. I even recall myself as a small baby watching the funeral of Josip Broz Tito. I mean, I was just 4, and my daddy told me that this is important. I was sitting with him on the sofa and watching the funeral, and I saw him crying. Later on, I just through my family, I actually have been following or have followed the crisis of the 80s as I grew up. So I was in a way politicized at a very, very early age, and having a wonderful childhood, playing a lot, doing sports, but boys and girls do at that age, and at the same time having these political debates at home and reading a lot. I just suddenly found myself in a changing and challenging time. So when I turned 14, that was the year 1990. And that was the year of the beginning of the collapse of the former Yugoslav state, collapse of the Yugoslav Communist Party in January 1990, and then soon later on the speeded and heated conflicts between different republics, ending up into first wars in Slovenia 1991 and the war in Croatia 1991. I'm happy that Vesna Tešelić is here. We haven't met for a while, but she did a lot on the war on the wars in former Yugoslavia and also in Croatia. And then at the age of 15 and a half and 16, I just woke up in my war, under quotation marks. And I mean, we might discuss and want to discuss why I called it my war, because when you experience such a huge shift and a traumatic experience in your life, you have a choice, or you hope to have choice to deal with it in a way. And that explains basically why I started after the war and throughout the war, not only becoming more political, but I started negotiating basically my fate, asking myself, of course, you always ask yourself the first question, why did it happen to me? And why did it happen to my family? Why did it happen to my country? Why my home was taken away? Why did my friends disappear? Etc. That's very personal, very intimate. But then later on, through all the pain and suffering, and trauma, and we became refugees, were expelled from the country, ended up in Austria. You just start trying to understand what happened to you, and by trying to understand what happened to you, not only emotionally but also politically, socially, etc., you are immediately thrown into, I mean, at least your in a kind of your next steps are to a certain extent predetermined. So when I came to Austria in 1993, we spent almost a year in a refugee camp close to Vienna. I started going to gymnasium again, finished the third or the fourth grade, and did my high school diploma. It was quite clear for me that I'm gonna continue working and striving to understand what happened to me in a structured way. So basically, to confront myself with my fate, which is also an emotional fight. Of course, it's full of pain. It's not easy, but at the same time, trying to understand meant for me reading books, meeting people, going back to my home country, trying to understand, to talk, to speak, to explore my communities that were left in former Yugoslavia, etc. And that's actually then the answer. So I became a social scientist for the sake of understanding and being able to understand what's happened to me, which led me to the next step, which is, I think, quite specific for social sciences. You try to understand how societies work, how politics works, how the relationship or the mutual relation between different people is constructed. What are the powers? What's the political power? What are the spaces for engagement, for shaping politics, etc. And now it's going to be. No, it's actually when I came, it was 93. It's 2025. It's 32 years later. I'm still trying to understand.
Thank you very much for sharing this. Also, like in a more personal and intimate way, perhaps. It's very interesting also to hear perhaps how it's shaping how you try to understand this, like in a more structured way, you said. And I think we're also going to later delve a bit more deeper into this. But we also wanted to ask you perhaps how did you came to the decision to now shift your focus perhaps a little bit from writing a more personal book with Ankommen, just more biographical. Yeah.
I mean, the latest book, and that's the first book of that type that I have published. Usually when you end up under quotation marks in academia, you publish academic papers and stick to the rules of this field, and the rules of academia have changed a lot in the last 2 or 3 decades. So you have to specialize, you have to produce these peer-reviewed papers, do projects, etc., etc. And sometimes that's quite far from political and social realities. I mean, you look at the political phenomena, social phenomena, and at societies, but what you publish might sometimes sound very, or look like very distant from the political fights, from social struggles, from etc., etc. And then due to my life path, I became a social scientist, political scientist, and I have been publishing, and I'm publishing and working in research projects and producing academic publications, of course, and all my previous books were academic books. But what I always did since I finished my MA studies, I always engaged in public debates. I was always writing, contributing to media, to international and national media outlets. I was giving speeches. I was going into schools. I was organizing and running or co-shaping or taking part in civic society initiatives, in partly in activism, etc., etc. So I always understood social science and political sciences as being political. Political science is being political and having not only a task, but having also a duty to take part and to speak up, to engage, to shape, to do something. And I think it's for me, like even today, when I observe all these changes, I think I feel an urge to contribute and to do something. And that's precisely the main reason why I decided to go for a totally different book, which is a kind of a nonfiction that's having a kind of a personal biographical part in it, that's having a kind of a non-fictional a part where I try to understand or to explain certain phenomena, like how does politics of fear of the far right influence democracy? What does solidarity in a society, in a civil society sector mean if you want to argue and fight for human rights and value-based democratic societies? What does racism and xenophobia do to democracies, etc., etc. So this is kind of a background, and certainly one of the crucial questions is basically, and it's a very universal question: what does it take? What is needed for any one of us, independent if whether we are a refugee or migrant or man, women, have this or that cultural, sexual, a personal affiliation, identity. What does it mean in a society to be accepted, to be visible, to contribute, and to be an integral, accepted part of a certain society? And of course, for me as a refugee, I came as a refugee in 1993, no language knowledge, no clue about Austria at all. I just knew that, that they are quite good in skiing, and that Arnold Schwarzenegger is a famous film star from Austria, but that was it actually. And that was totally strange for me. But now today, as I said in my first statements, it has become a part of my identity. And this kind of trying to ask and to find answers on the question of identity and home. What is a home for a migrant? What is a home, and what's a notion of home for a refugee and who is expelled, who is trying to gain certain security, to put the feet on the ground? And all of us, we all want to be want to have a home, kind of a notion of home. And against the background, that's this kind of a universal question, but against the background of what has been happening in Austria and many Western European countries in the last, let's say, 5, 10, 15 years, or most visibly in the last 5 years, the kind of very fast rise of far right following, let's say, the migration movements of 2015, 2016, the rise of Alternative for Germany in Germany, the skyrocketing rise of Freedom Party in Austria, of far right in Italy, huge successes of far right in the Netherlands, in Scandinavian countries, far right challenging the mainstream in France, and now Trump, back then for the first time a president, and now again leading a whole nation actually into some kind of authoritarian direction. Against these events, I felt an urge and a need to write a personal book, to give a voice to all those, let's say, migrants and refugees and the others, the invisible, not only in Austria, but also in Germany, in the European context, and to try to explore this notion of arriving, being at home, to try to explore the notion on the personal level, to give a voice to those that are affected by certain policies in all those European countries, and also by the rise of far right, to explore the fears that they might have when they hear the political concept of remigration, for example, being spread by major political parties, etc., etc. And I'm really happy that this book, which was published just a few days before the Austrian general elections, where the far-right Freedom Party won for the first time in the history of Austria. It has raised a lot of attention, at least here in Austria, and a lot of vivid debates and public debates and discussions. And living in times that we live in, I think that giving up is not an option. We need to engage, all of us, in the capacity that we have. And someone who is teaching at university, a public worker, someone who speaks up in the public, I felt that I need to contribute myself.
Thank you very much for sharing that. I think it's a very powerful appeal, and also very interesting to hear how perhaps the personal activism and the more sociological lens are very intertwined in the book as well. Yes, so for the next section, we would like to dive a little bit deeper into your own experience of arriving. You already talked about it a little bit, and with your refugee experience specifically.
We were going to throw another set of questions at you, if that's okay.
No, that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, okay, because you've told us a little bit about kind of the book Ankommen and how you came to write it from a kind of an urge and a duty to speak publicly and engage publicly, but also kind of on a personal note. And as Leah said, we'd like to dive a bit deeper into the content of the book as well. As of now, it's only available in German, but perhaps there's going to be an English translation. And we were wondering, you called your book Ankommen, Arrival, and we were wondering what that specifically means to you, and then perhaps secondly also what factors you would say allowed you to arrive in Austria in the 90s, or continuously perhaps, and what factors did you find made it more difficult to arrive?
Yes, of course. I mean, I think that's one of the most interesting question when you conceptually think of what does it mean to arrive, and what's the notion of home, etc., etc., what is needed to feel at home. Then you quite automatically arrive at a very simple conclusion that basically it needs a lot, of course, but that's quite naive to say it needs a lot, of course. But it needs to be a combination of personal circumstances, probably efforts, contemplations, steps that you do, that you have actually energy and power to do, because sometimes when you are deeply traumatized, you can't develop any kind of a positive internal force to do or to make some bolder steps. But so it's an individual story, but it's also a societal and political story on the other hand side. So in my personal case, it was Austria in the 90s, just to illustrate what I mean. So when you lose everything, you are just let's say a naked existence. So you don't have a home, you don't have money, you have your memories, you have your emotions, but what you face is just unpredictability and insecurity. And you can be the strongest person in this world and have the biggest kind of amount of energy and the resilience and everything. You would, given the circumstances, you will not be able to make any kind of a quick adjustment and steps towards a normal life, which you always, I mean, if you are in a difficult situation, it goes not only for refugees, but for all extreme situations in life, you always aim at having a normality, being being able to work, to live, to love, to whatever, all that stuff that we like and that makes the life livable. So what you then, of course, need to ask, and that's the 90s of, in my case, you need a help, you need a helping hand, you need structures that are able basically to make this kind of arrival easier, to structure it, to create preconditions and to implement certain steps, political, social, cultural, individual, psychological measures, and that you need in order to have a kind of way that is a bit easier in this process of arrival. And in the 90s, when I came, Austria was in a kind of a delicate situation. So there was a huge, very positive and welcoming effort of the Austrian society, and there was a civil society to welcome the Bosnian refugees. And that was not for the first time that refugees came to Austria. So there was a first kind of a huge movement of refugees into Austria was in 1956, after the Hungarian Revolution was smashed by the Russians. Then 68 from the Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia back then. In 81, following the events in Poland, and then came the next kind of a big movement, the similar one like in Germany, from former Yugoslavia, from Croatia first, then later on from Bosnia. 90,000 refugees from Bosnia came to Austria, and then later on also from Kosovo. And at that moment, it was a kind of a welcoming culture on one hand side, but at the same time, it coincided with the rise, with the first significant rise of the far right in Austria, but also on the European soil. So if you, all of you might remember Jörg Haider, the boss of the Freedom Party, one of the first far right populist leaders that later on also entered a coalition in 2000. So Jörg Haider was the first one at the European level, a first far-right leader to enter a kind of a government, which led the European Union to introduce sanctions against Austria. Imagine as 2025, who would introduce sanctions against, I don't know, Italy, Netherlands, Austria, whatever. But that's a side note we might want to pick up later on. But in any case, that was the welcoming culture on one hand side, as a functioning social state, which Austria was, functional rule of law, institutions, free media, but there was a rise of far right. And when I came in the beginning of 1993, it was the time of the so-called, in German, Ausländer raus, so foreigners get out, a referendum in Austria, when Jörg Haider tried actually to argue there are too many, always this kind of too many migrants and refugees. We need to go back to what we think is the authentic notion of being an Austrian. But still, luckily, the institutions and the overwhelming parts of the society and civil society were not only welcoming the refugees, but also the institutional, political, social provisions in place made this arrival easier. So we would, get help to learn German, get some social services free of charge, get some money. We got a status, a legal status that was solved and fine, etc., etc. And then obviously the school education and all these kind of measures, including the possibility to enter the legal labor markets and to establish ourselves. So on that hand side, that's needed. That's what you need. But on the other hand side comes actually this kind of a question, how able you are as an individual to make your way through this jungle that you see in front of you. And certainly learning language is one of the most important tools that are steps that you need to go from the beginning on. But there is something else to finish this to answer. Something else that in my case was crucial besides all these political, social provisions in place and language and everything. And that's actually the recognition by the others. Recognition by the others, or to make it even more general, the empathy by someone else. We, the humankind, I mean, we are social creatures, and we depend a lot on recognition, on being seen, being recognized, being touched, being hugged by someone in order to thrive and to flourish, etc., etc. And in my case, I was lucky to meet along my path in the first 3 years a lot of people that helped me and my family, including my school class in the high school. That was amazing. Even financed my high school diploma trip to Greece, to Corfu, where for the first time I boarded a plane and flew, and all this stuff. And on the other hand side, it was sports. That's quite interesting. So you need places and fields where you are seen. And I, as former Yugoslavia was known for top-notch world-class basketball. When I was young and growing up, I was just playing basketball day in, day out. And I became a professional basketball player in Austria, which of course brings you in the moment where you have a lot of questions, where your identity is renegotiated, where you seek for acceptance by the others. It gives you a lot of recognition, visibility, and that certainly helped me individually to become part of this society.
Yeah. Well, it's quite beautiful that you mentioned empathy as such an important factor, and we'll be getting back at that later on in the interview as well, based on what you wrote about in the book. But I also found it really powerful how you said that it's always this interplay of kind of how much agency and how much just resources, emotional, personal resources you have to kind of go into this journey, and at the same time being structurally constrained in a way. I think that's a really interesting way of putting it. And perhaps adding to that, or further inquiring into that, in Ankommen, you mentioned kind of these three principles: education, performance, and adaptation, in German Bildung, Leistung, Anpassung, as these praised key factors for a so-called successful arrival. And we were wondering how you reflect on these principles today and what they kind of mean to you today and how you would contextualize that.
Yeah, I mean, this is probably one of the toughest debate that I have to lead with myself, but also with a lot of other people. I think this kind of education, performance, adjust, or the others will put it like assimilate and or just erase what you are to become something different. What is now, I mean, the far right discourse, or far extreme right discourse in this country, or like the alternative of Germany, but also some conservative parties in Europe, sees the integration of migrants and the refugees as a process as a kind of a one-way street. So this is what we are. We are the Austrians. You have to accommodate and to prove that you are worth of our recognition, and once you have erased what you are and have become what we are, then you are accepted. But then at the same time, and this is the tricky moment, you are never accepted when you start erasing your identity. And actually all European countries are multicultural, multi-identity, super diverse countries. Basically, this is a very dangerous notion that leads back to the 19th century, probably, to the rise of ethnic nationalism, etc., etc. And within this kind of education, performance, adjusting, assimilation discourse is a dangerous one when it comes to adjustment and assimilation, but to a certain extent, this education performance is or has become a part of how our society function in general. I mean, like performance or competition or performing or competing with others has most evidently in the course of the last, let's say, 20, 25, 30 years since the 90s in Western Europe has become a kind of norm, societal norm. And some colleagues of mine would call it like kind of a neoliberal recomposition of societies, where basically the economic criteria like efficiency and competition and comparison are like the main pillars of our societies. And of course, I mean that will be a kind of a huge additional discussion to this one. But I think we need to distinguish between those principles that you just listed. And I think, of course, education is fundamental. But then when it comes to education, then the question is, how do you shape the educational system? And how do you create opportunities for all or equal opportunities for all to participate and to grow into a society, to whether you go for I mean, let's take the Austrian example, whether you frame, as the far right is just doing right now, any other language than German that is used in the schools or schoolyards as something that needs to be actually expelled and forbidden, or you accept the simple fact that this kind of plurality of languages, of identities, of cultures, of different approaches to whatever business, personal relationship is enriching your country, or has actually made Germany, Austria, and all the European countries what they are today, open-minded countries based of understanding and tolerance. So I think the education is of course is something that equips you or enables you to make the next steps and to understand what performance, adjustment, assimilation in your personal case might mean. In my case, just to add a kind of a personal story to it, my daddy was very much pushing for the performance in education. So he was the only child in his family that went to the high school, reading books and being someone who was convinced that the Yugoslav socialism has enabled the social mobility through education. So from the 40s, 50s, Yugoslavia basically created preconditions for many to have a free of charge high school education services, etc., and to become something different, to grow into a kind of a new role. And my daddy was pushing this kind of performance education, and I was performing. And then he would always tell, I mean, you need to be 5 times or 10 times as good as your Austrian colleagues in order to succeed, which I was trying to do. But then, as you, especially in social sciences, you read a lot, and then you read Bourdieu and Foucault, and you read the constructivists, and you go into philosophy and read Hannah Arendt and this and that, and you see a lot as you go along. You start questioning those principles, and you start to inventing for yourself or living a very, let's say, not proud. I mean, proud is probably not the best expression, but very self-reflected position towards these kind of a major concepts like integration, assimilation, performance, etc. And what I tried all the time to turn the story upside down. I have performed, but the question is, are all others, refugees, migrants, those that are marginalized, able to perform? And usually it's a result of social, political circumstances that many are excluded and not able. Even if they wish to perform, they can't perform. That this kind of social marginalization, also discrimination, starts in the schools, starts in the kindergartens. That this is basically reproduced or reproduced by societies. And my kind of a conclusion is that we have to, and this is what I try to do in my daily work and in my scientific work, but also in my public work, that we need to open up perspectives of those that are marginalized, sidelined, that are weaker, and to be able to think a society, conceptualize society from their perspective upwards and not from top down, like let's say Trump and a few oligarchs today in the States are actually trying to redesign the US American society and politics. And basically that leads also to a very kind of a critical position to giving up my identity to gain another one. And I don't think that we can only have one identity, of course. I mean, I have a plurality of identity. I'm still a citizen of Bosnia and Herzegovina, but I also call Austria my second home, and I'm not ready to let the far right take my Austria away. And I fight for that one. At the same time, I engage those in from Yugoslavia, etc., etc. So I think this has been important for me, and I think it's also a kind of a position in the debate, also a position that I developed in my book that caused a lot of kind of discussions, even more now, of course, in the times that we live in and in the times of the rise of far right.
Yeah. Thank you for elaborating on your personal experience there as well, and your kind of family experience. That's also quite interesting to hear such a personal perspective. I thought it was particularly interesting when you said that, integration is this kind of one-way street, but it also doesn't really seem to have an end. And we seem to speak about integration so much without really knowing what it is. So that's a really, really interesting point. We would, as you said, like to discuss more about these perspectives from the bottom up and kind of the perspectives of those that are usually made invisible. So yeah, we would like to speak a little bit more about current experiences of refugees and migration, for which Leah's prepared a few more questions that she's going to shoot at you.
Yes, thank you very much for sharing that. It's also really interesting to hear how perhaps this narrative of performance is like hiding a bit more structural factors. And yeah, we wanted to ask you, based on your own experience, but also perhaps your experience as as a social scientist, do you think like that these expectations have changed over the years? Or is it like an underlying phenomenon perhaps? And maybe also in relation to that, do you think there are specific norms or ideas that inform like these ideas of citizenship perhaps as well?
Yeah, I think a lot has changed and shifted in the meantime, and I alluded at it from the very beginning of our conversation. I think what has changed or what has shifted dramatically is the overall view of the population on migration, on the refugees. Having these topics nowadays framed as usually as a problem and as a threat. So you can easily observe it now in the electoral debate in Germany, where actually the migrants are framed as a threat and as a security problem for Germany. And whatever you have in terms of political solutions, it's even not only by the center political parties, of course, by the far right, but also by the center political parties. It's quite focused on how to prevent, how to reject, how to control, how to disciplinize migrants, refugees. In Austria, I had even an impression during the electoral campaign and until today that you had, at least I had sometimes a feeling that this is the only topic. I mean, like this kind of a migration, and migration from the far right perspective or political point of view was just the so-called the mother of all questions. So the space or the rooms were filled with, forgive my French, with the narrative full of shit. Totally neglecting the facts, neglecting the historical roots, neglecting the very character of those societies that we live in. And it led to actually not only absurd situation and arguments, but also to very dangerous in putting into question of some of basic principles that we have established in Europe after 1945. And I mean, as I said at the beginning, no oblivion, safeguarding human rights, peace, European legacy. I think what we see in front of our eyes, at least from some political forces, is a direct attack on European values, norms, and human rights. And in Austria, you would have like members from the Freedom Party questioning the European Convention of Human Rights, asking if this is very much needed. Now in the States, President Trump contemplated or kind of created a picture of migrants eating dogs and animals. So basically post-truth policies par excellence, basically arguing without any facts. And now what we see since this inauguration and since he took over the office, it's a kind of unparalleled offensive or even a revolution that he starts or tries to kick off against migrants by today now having a next executive order allowing the officers to enter churches and schools to hunt the illegal migrants, etc., etc. And I think when we but to put it in social sciences terms, I mean, what we have seen as a major shift is a normalization of far-right discourses and narratives, taking over of some of those arguments by the center parties, making it just normal to even have Elon Musk now on Monday obviously showing a Nazi sign, and then having a debate whether this is was this a Nazi, was the angle the right one and not, but no, it was not. I mean, how far have we moved from the consensus of the 60s, 70s, 80s that we need to discuss it today? And not only that we need to discuss it, that we have someone who is second to the mightiest person in the world, President of the United States, being an obvious racist and having sympathies with ideologies that have both worst of the humankind upon us in the 20th century, and on a global level. Also, I mean, visibly in Europe, of course, we see this kind of a new frontiers and new fronts between the new authoritarian, populist, post-truth forces slash, I don't know, in the States, oligarchs and some elites in Europe, and on the other hand side, those forces, those parts of the society that still do believe that liberal democracies, rule of law, checks and balances, free media, social state, or to put it even broadly, dignity of a single person is the most important, by far the most important feature of what makes us human. And I think what's that we usually try to, I mean, when you have dark times, you try to find solace in dark times. And there's a wonderful book by Michael Ignatieff. I think the title is Finding Solace in Dark Times. But I think the ultimate question is basically, first of all, to understand what's happening in front of our eyes, and then to see, not to give up and kind of enter a defeatist vicious circle, but to engage and to see what needs to be done in order to protect what is sacred from the perspective of every human being and their dignity.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, maybe to follow up on that, you also introduced the term the new invisible in Ankommen, maybe also in relation to the COVID pandemic from what I understood. But I found it a very intriguing term. And I think it also ties in perhaps with how the dynamics for refugees today have changed. So we were wondering if you could elaborate on this specifically also a bit more.
I mean, it's not my term, the new invisibility. I mean, that has been used quite often throughout the history of political ideas. What I picked up here is a notion from the French philosopher Pierre Vallon, who a few years ago wrote a small booklet called The Parliament of the Invisible. Actually arguing back then, not against the rise of the far right, but against the societal, economical circumstances of the last 22 decades that have led to the erosion of the social states, to more competition, and to marginalization of huge parts of the population, including migrants, refugees, poor, working classes, people living in poverty under the poverty line, those that are excluded because they look differently, they have a different political opinion, they have a different sexual orientation, whatever. I think as we had a kind of a peak of the social state in Europe in the 70s and 80s and invested a lot in equality and kind of not only equality in political terms, but equality in social terms, in gender terms, etc., etc. And when, as the European states were, the Western European states were putting the human person and its dignity into the center of policies, many of those achievements have starting to erode in the last, let's say, 1 or 2 decades. And the invisibility, now you have a kind of invisibility within the European borders, within the European Union, within the national states. But on a global level, of course, you have a invisibility of certain regions, like when we speak about the Western Balkans, I mean, following the notion of Balkanism by Maria Todorova and many others. So it's kind of a semi-peripheral regions of Europe are also made or invisible or subject to policies from those that are visible, but those are quite problematic. But that's a different story, different topic. But the invisibility, to tell 1 or 2 examples, basically, that has consequences for how we frame our societies and how we understand our democracies. And I mean, first example is, of course, the example of Corona crisis, Corona pandemic, which was actually a pandemic or a phase that showcased all the deep layers of marginalization of certain parts of the population. Those sitting in the supermarkets, waking up at 4 a.m. to open them, those that were that are engaged in care services, those that have women that are taking care alone of their kids, etc., etc. They suffered the most throughout the pandemic, and there was no proper answer by our democracies and states to this problem. That's one form of the invisibility that has marginalized and left alone many, and we still have to cope with the consequences. Another example is now from Vienna or from Austria when it comes to a different type of invisibility, which is the political invisibility or a lack of representation due to the very restrictive citizenship laws. And now we have this citizenship debate now again, coming back like big through the decision of one of the presidential orders, executive orders of Trump regarding the citizenship law in the United States of America, which is gonna cause a lot of debates and legal procedures, etc., because the birthright citizenship is part of the U.S. American Constitution. But in Austria, we have the most restrictive, one of the most restrictive citizenship laws in globally and in Europe. It's very hard to get citizenship due to the social criteria and administrative barriers, etc. So that in the end, what's the result? The real political result is actually that almost 1/3 or now 1/4, but going towards 1/3 of the Viennese population can't participate in the elections and decide on major issues ranging from infrastructure, schools to whatever you have on a local level. So you get through this kind of invisibility due to political regulations of a certain segment of society, in this case citizenship law. You get a veritable political or democratic problem. And I think as we move on and as we see this kind of a huge shift towards an oligarchical authoritarian system in the States, in the United States of America, I think the amount of those that are invisible might increase dramatically, which in the end is the poison for representative or for democracy itself. And I mean, there is a kind of course, personal note to it. So there are individual fates and behind it. And we see now the first pictures of migrants where the appointments were cancelled for the asylum in the States, crying and being desperate. We're probably going to see more of those individual moments. But right now I rather focused on this kind of societal consequences of the invisibility.
Yeah. Also, yeah. Sounds like a very multifaceted problem, I guess, and just invisibility and due to different factors. I think we also, like you mentioned a lot about it already, but I think it's interesting to dive a bit more deeper into it still. So I think Teresa wants to, would like to go on with the shift of the right more specifically. If you could elaborate a bit on that.
Thank you. Thanks, Leah. So we're getting very deep into your expertise as a political scientist. That's really fascinating. We'd like to discuss the kind of current global political environment a little more, which you've already kind of picked up on. So as you said, you pointed as what kind of in your book as well as in your scientific publications, as far as I understand, you point towards the shift of discourses in the European and American political spectrum, kind of from the center-right towards an increasingly extremist far-right with discriminatory and racist theories kind of blossoming. And you've mentioned before, I think, remigration theories kind of springing up. We can, of course, discuss this in an Austrian, in a German, in a Western American context. What we're wondering a little bit is, would you argue that this is kind of a novel character of the far and extreme right? Is there like some new elements, as you mentioned, kind of the neglect of facts and the kind of direct attacks on human rights and on democratic structures, this kind of discourse of a revolution, and especially the kind of the normalization of these discourses also in the political center. Would you say that's a new kind of development, or is that just the kind of natural continuation of how things have been developing since the 90s, where you mentioned migration was already the mother of all questions?
I mean, in a kind of broader historical picture, I think it's this kind of revolution of rage against the system, of fantasies about superiority, about clean body of nation, etc., etc. I mean, this is not, of course, this is not for the first time that it pops up in the imagination, but also in policies and the ideologies of political groups and political elites. I mean, even when we now go back to the ideology of nationalism in the late 80s and 90s in former Yugoslavia, that led or was one of the factors that led to the war. Of course, we also there have these kind of ideologies that have or used to have or still do have roots to in the 19th century, and this some kind of reimagining or reframing now the past and presenting it as a solution for the future. There is a wonderful booklet by Zygmunt Bauman called Retrotopia, where he actually also claims that what far-right and anti-democratic forces today, or those kind of new reactionary nationalist forces are trying to do today, is a to erect a retrotopia, to build a society or project something in the future based on the past that never existed in that particular way. I mean, Austria, as they call it in German, reines, pure Austria. So to translate into English, never existed. I mean, not in the monarchy, not in the 20s. And we know, and we painfully learned what those types of fantasies, ideologies, when they come to power, can have as a result, and that's, I mean, those are one of the most painful past parts of the history of the humankind. Reminders of the 30s and the 40s of the last century. But certainly is new on the European soil, but also in the United States since 1945. And even more since the end of the Cold War, where back in the 90s we had, at least in the core of the West, we had this kind of story or narrative of the end of history, of the final victory of the liberal democracy that's now going to spread all over the globe and bring democracy, wealth, money. Mercedes-Benz as a car, as a symbol of this kind of a new era to all parts of the globe. I mean, and contrasting the last 10 to 15 years and this perpetual kind of vicious cycle of crisis and of exaggeration and of rage, it certainly is something new on the European soil. And now the question is, what are the features of this new? I mean, I mentioned one. I think one of the major features is that parties of the political center have started intensively normalizing the discourses of the far right, the discourses that are strictly and obviously and openly running against the consensus of liberal democracies and human rights that we have established since 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So going offensively and openly against universal values, universalism, as you wish, I think that's certainly new. I mean, you will have, like in Austria and Germany, also in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, like small bunches of people sitting in the cellars and then spreading the Nazi ideology or whatever. But that was certainly not a mainstream. And Christian Democrats, conservative parties would be European parties and pro-democratic parties and be, even though conservative and traditional, but they would simply stick and protect those democratic achievements. That's gone. Secondly, I think that's an important turn. I think as we have a lot of literature in political sciences and politics of emotions and politics of fear and politics of rage and etc. And the phenomenon that the far right and the authoritarian forces are able to capitalize or even to produce those kind of fears and rage and be more successful than the democratic parties and leftist parties in capitalizing on the crisis and shifting horizons in economy and in society. I mean, that's something that is probably a kind of a new feature. And then, of course, what comes, and now that I'm in my head, I go back to the inauguration ceremony and see those guys sitting on the left side from Trump, like Zuckerbergs and Elon Musks and Bezos and all those digital tech oligarchs. I think what, of course, has changed is the fact that social media, or this kind of a new reconstruction of the democratic public, which is happening in front of our eyes, that has contributed to establishment of opinions or opinions of a certain group based on emotions that present themselves as a truth. As factual truth. And this is this kind of a post-truth debate, whereas the facticity and the facts, on the other hand side, can be circumvented in those debates. So it's simply, I mean, the best example, you have someone, he buys a huge social media platform, turns it into a kind of a propaganda machine for certain political but also personal interests, and presents it as a normality, as a given. I think that's certainly a totally new phenomenon. So you have a kind of a distortion of the public, and this kind of attempt to answer your question with an example from Austria. I mean, the Austria Freedom Party has established media for themselves, like separate alternative media channels, YouTube channels, TV stations, radio stations, some kind of a bubbles in Facebook and in social media that are much bigger and much higher than what the Austrian public or public media can offer, and have results and insights that actually those information are mostly used by those people, so that you then have a kind of the Trumps, the migrants are eating dogs, suddenly in social media networks becoming a truth, and people start believing it, and I think that's entirely new, and we don't have tools how to deal with this type of a situation.
Yeah. Thank you, Vedran. I feel like in a way the tools to deal with it are also diagnosing it in the first place, which you did very succinctly there. Thank you. So yeah, that was interesting because I remember you started by also reconnecting kind of this rise of the right to the kind of the wars in the former Yugoslavia as well. So we've established that connection too, but then pointing out how on the one hand the normalization of these discourses, even in the political center, is this novel dynamic alongside kind of the distortion of the democratic public. I thought that was a really interesting observation too, together with kind of neoliberal and social media oriented dynamics. That's really fascinating. And I want to get back to another thing you said, because I think that bridges quite nicely to our final kind of set of questions that might make us end on a slightly more, if not optimistic, maybe more I'm going to say optimistic note, because you mentioned the politics of emotions and of fear and of rage, and how that's capitalized upon by the far right and by actors in this sector. And it kind of reminded me of what you said earlier about empathy and kind of recognition and dignity, and those things being crucial. So I'm wondering if that's not, if not, that's not kind of also connected to the politics of emotion. And yeah, from what we understood in our research about you as well, is that you do quite a lot of activism in different civil society organizations. And we'd like to hear some of your thoughts on that. So I would give the word back to Leah, so we can kind of end on this note as well.
Thank you. So in the book, I think you very beautifully described that empathy is ultimately not just an interpersonal feeling, but also a political category, indeed a basic prerequisite for a functioning democratic community. And yes, as Teresa mentioned, when we researched about you, and I think you also mentioned that yourself, you mentioned that you're active in several civil society groups, such as Adriatne, Refugees for Austria, I think is the translation. And we wondered if you maybe could elaborate a little bit more on the potential of perhaps this organization in your own experience, or generally civil society organizations, for promoting a better arrival for refugees also, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think you're totally right, Teresa, because when you mentioned the politics of emotions, and that's now we have the overwhelming kind of politics of fear spreading over our societies. But I mean, when it comes to emotions, I think they always have been parts of political debates and of societal debates, and the emotions ranging from fear and rage and the feeling that someone is taking someone from you and someone is a problem, towards different set of emotions like hope, like being positive about something, being tender, being constructive, etc., etc. I mean, these are all always have been political terms. And as we know from the history of democracies, democratic societies, but also from the history of democracy or democratic societies in Europe since the Second World War, if it wouldn't have been for optimism and for hope, for the power of shaping and changing, while connecting to the others and creating kind of a bigger communities, we probably would never achieved what we have achieved in Europe since the 40s and 50s, and even if you wish, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the European Convention of Human Rights, with this notion of putting the dignity and liberty and equality of all human beings to the forefront, and defining what you need for this, as the US Americans would say, pursuit of happiness, equal opportunities, or to live livable life, as Judith Butler would describe it. I think that has been a core of European societies, and that has not disappeared. I think that's important. That has not disappeared. It's still a kind of a contrast, or not only a contrast emotion, but a contrast political program to the rise of authoritarian populism or populist authoritarianism or far-right authoritarianism. In the end, democracies are always palaces of hope, of building on a hope that a better life is possible, more equal, more just life is possible. Autocracies are always palaces of fear, of control, of repression, of trying to suppress what people, communities feel. And I think we found ourselves today in a momentum where we have this massive spread of fear and rage, capitalized by the far-right authoritarian forces. Today we have a situation that almost 2/3 or even more of the world population lives in autocracies, up to 70%, and only 30% live in democratic societies. So basically, Europe today is anomaly. It's not the normalcy in a global horizon or in the global picture. But nevertheless, I think as long as there is a single person that believes that hope, human being centered politics or society is possible, there will be a force that can challenge and can oppose these kind of dark visions of societies. And I think it's even more in times that we live in, and under the impression of, I just said at the beginning, so under the impression of this of Trump's inauguration and the possible chancellor, he calls himself Chancellor of the People, People's Chancellor, Volkskanzler, which is a Nazi vocabulary, Kickl in Austria. I think that even more than ever, civil society action based on hope, but not on a naive hope, on a disengaged hope, but on a hope as a lived practice that leads to engagement, to standing up for something, that this is more important than ever, and that this is happening. I mean, you have people taking to the streets, you have petitions, you have brave lawyers, public officials that are going to stand up against the ridiculous policies of Trump. You have people in the media, you have your neighbors, basically, that do believe in certain values and in the dignity of humankind, and are able to step up. And now, but the question is how to channel, how to take the energies that you have on the other hand side how to mobilize and engage more people that might be also tired, that might turn into some kind of a new biedermeier. Just the other day, read a kind of a new opinion survey from Germany with results saying basically that in this kind of a sea of crisis and unpredictability and uncertain future and wars and climate change, people or population in Germany, majority has started going back to the private lives, trying to lead this kind of, or to simulate a normalcy on a very personal level, which is then politically, or from the standpoint of democracy, is dangerous. And I think this is kind of a reactivate, engage, base all that on truth, on facts. That's the only program. That's the only program that we have, and it's not a futile exercise. I'm very much convinced. It's not an exercise that's can't shape the future, but it's certainly an exercise that needs to be taken with not only seriosity but with urgency. So there is an urgency to stand up, to engage, and to do something.
Thank you for sharing that. So I also specifically liked how you connected the notion of hope in a more societal way, but then also to not leave it with like a kind of naive hope, but to implement in some kind of activism as well. I think there's a lot more to unpack as well, but yeah, looking at the time, I don't think we very much have a lot or any time left. So we would slowly come to the closing and then maybe save these discussions also for the Q&A of the audience. Yeah.
That's a great idea, Leah. Thank you. So as she was saying, we're slowly coming to an end of this really fascinating interview that could probably go on for much longer. Finally, we would like you to reflect a little more still on the impact of your book that we kind of started talking about earlier before we got into more broader political discussions, but kind of linked to what you just said about kind of harnessing hope and harnessing the energy that's still there. We're wondering if you think that your book, Arrival, kind of plays a part or contributes to this kind of harnessing of hope and channeling these energies that still remain. And if it perhaps in a way also reaches different audiences to those that you usually address.
I mean, when you go out to the public, when you write the book, of course you want the readers to read it, and you want it to have an impact. But at the same time, I think you have to be modest and humble, and just do what you need and can do, but not have any kind of messianic or whatever expectation from the product that you produce. I think we all take part in shaping our lives and our environments, our communities, by having your project, and you guys that joined us today by taking part in this debate, carrying it to the next steps, and engaging in your communities. I think this is actually harnessing hope and doing. And I mean, certainly a book can have a contribution. And I had, I mean, until now, like 25, 30 public events, and I don't know, countless interviews and contributions to media. And there will be a lot more events coming up. And I mean, the first edition was sold out, and people are coming back to me. But it's again just a kind of a small drop in a big sea. But what I think is important, that's I think for me one of the most emotional and most positive feedback that I get when after a presentation someone approaches me and tells me his or her story. When I get an email that someone just listened to an interview and then says, I mean, thank you so much for opening up, because I always also wanted to open up and to tell my story, but I didn't have a courage, and et cetera, et cetera. Or when I then later on in a master seminar at the University of Vienna, which started in October, the book was published in September, and then a young man approaches me from Syria. He came to Austria in 2015, and he has become the Austrian citizen in the meantime. And he then decided to join my master's seminar and to write a thesis on the Syrian refugees and on the arrival and of them from 2015 to 2016. And he said he read the book and that's motivated him because he believes that the plurality and what makes Austria or Germany a rich, a colorful, a positive country is precisely this plurality of identities, of ways of life, etc., etc. I think this is then the most important. But I mean, just to move away from the book to something that I believe is even more important. That's this kind of a contribution that all of us have to make in our communities, and the question how we have to do to make this contribution. What are the ways? And I quite often quote the German book author and thinker Caroline Emke, who a few years ago published a book against the Hass, also gegen den Hass, against the hatred. And then what she elaborates in the book is actually the question how to create a powerful community, powerful and active, engaged enough to change and to shape societies. And she contemplates on the notion of we. What's the group? What's the we? What's the notion of something that we need in democracies, as you said. And then she says this kind of a we emerges when we unite and take our hands together, put our hands together, and when we start acting in a courageous, tender and constructive way. And I think being courageous, being constructive, but also being tender to each other with what we do is a possible way forward.
Yes. Thank you. That was a beautiful end to this as well. And I think in all humility, surely your book contributed there as well in kind of even endowing individuals with the emotional resources to deal with these questions and to find communities to get active in and to, as you put it, or as the author put it, to act courageously and tenderly and constructively. Just to wrap up, I do want to ask if we can anticipate any more such publications from you, or whether you'll be sticking to scientific articles in the future. Any thoughts on that?
Not at all. I mean, I just published. That's going to be now published in a German monthly called Blätter für Deutsche und internationale Politik, which is one of the most prominent papers for international relations, international but also societal questions in Germany, on entitled Kickl, Vučić, Orban. What are the contours of the new global authoritarian international, and also trying to argue for certain solutions. But I mean, these are like small contributions and comments and op-eds, and there will be some podcasts, of course, coming. And I keep commenting on all those issues and working. That's quite obvious. But we just do what we can do and what we used to, as all of you do, and Vesna, Džihić, and many others that I also see here in the Zoom. Well, there will be another book on focusing on new nationalism, the rise of new nationalism, nativism, and authoritarianism in Ost and West, trying to conceptually reconnect it. That's going to be published. It's also going to be non-fiction, not personal in this case. I mean, it's not going to have the autobiographic notion that is quite strong in this one, and that's in preparation for set to be published in March 2026. So I'm working on it and have to deliver the manuscript in the summer. So,
well, thank you for those updates, and thank you in general, Vedran, for sharing your experience and your expertise on all these topics with us. We really, really enjoyed this exchange, and we hope that everybody listening in did so as well. That would conclude our interview. However, we'd like to re-invite the audience to submit questions in the chat. You can send them to Sarah, and then she's going to moderate them, and hopefully we'll get to answer a few more of those. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Vedran, Teresa, and Leah. We have now the questions from the audience. I tried to summarize them, put them in an order, because there were a lot of questions from the public. It was a very engaging debate. The first question or the first topic we want to address is the topic on arriving. The question was, have you finally arrived? And who decides if you have arrived or not? Maybe just being really brief on that, because we have a lot of questions, but I nevertheless wanted to ask it. Yeah.
Have you finally arrived? I don't think that I'm at any time in the future going to arrive. I mean, there is no final arrival for me. In that sense, I can't arrive in a state. I just can, and I have been arriving, and am I arriving in a society of people that are striving and fighting for something like democracy or dignity. I do, of course, arrive in on a personal note with my friends, with my family. I do arrive in different, and I feel as at home in different spots, from Bosnia to Serbia to also Germany, Austria, where I have arrived in the German literature and then in culture and in society. I've lived in the United States of America. I like also the US American society and those parts that I have been living in. So I think I see this arrival for me as a kind of ongoing deliberation of what my identity is, which is also shifting and changing, and as a way of posing questions under safe circumstances. I mean, in a kind of a safe environment. Certainly, if now someone would start here to implement the policy of remigration and start addressing me and my family, of course, then that will provoke, at least from my position, a kind of a harsh reaction, and trying also to claim Austria as my home country, or as a second home, in a way. But to finish, once you lose the warm feeling of your first home, and of the smell and the wind and the air and the small corners that you grew into, I don't think that you ever again can feel this deep intrinsic notion of really being at home in one place.
And following up on that, there is a next question. How would you define home and second home? What are the main features, in your opinion, of these conceptualizations, and what may be the main differences?
I mean, there is no straightforward answer. I think, of course, a language is a home, a literature is a home, emotions are home, but also places, people, faces, memories. So actually, it's again this kind of a plurality, but also something that is contingent upon certain moments and circumstances. So I don't know what just happened last year. There was I was in Sarajevo and having some kind of a conference on some topic. I don't know, it was democracy or what was it, rule of law or something. And then I just after the conference, I was like going to the city center, and someone just stopped me, and I didn't recognize him at the first sight, and then he introduced himself, and that was one of my friends from Priedor, from this kind of a basketball context, as where we would have like games, etc., etc. And then I started, and then I reconnected and remembered his face and how we played basketball, and then all kind of a small conversations like 40 years ago almost, or 35 when we were kids. And he opened up, and he was so tender, and we just started thinking and talking, and it ended up being a conversation of 1.5 hours in a coffee house. But during that conversation, I felt at home in a way suddenly. and you know, and this is this kind of a contingency of that feeling. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll straight up go with the next questions because there are so many. There is another question. It's a bit longer. As a scientist who lives in Austria, but is linked to these areas, I suppose, the former Yugoslavia, how do you assess the dynamics of relations between the former Yugoslav republics today? And a comment, we see on the ground that the citizens in all states that emerged from the former Yugoslavia are, again, above their political elites who continue to hold them back. How do you see the situation?
That will be just last semester. I had a class like the whole semester long on Eastern and Southeast European affairs and all these questions. So it will really take us. It will be a long ride to answer that kind of a question. But what we certainly have, just as a kind of a hint, I mean, the expectations of our societies democratizing and opening up and catching up with the normalcy of the West of Europe that we had after the wars. Of course, they have been largely disappointed, and those are the expectations of, you know, dealing with the past, reconciliation, etc., etc. We have passed or crossed a kind of a threshold where we now are in a new vicious circle of kind of animosities, political instrumentalization of the past for the sake of personal power, etc., etc. And I mean, when we, I just finished a publication on Kosovo and Serbia, and that's going to be published in German today or tomorrow as a working paper at my institute, at the Austrian Institute for International Affairs. And here I start off this paper with describing the violent attack of the paramilitary forces on Banjska, on a small village in Kosovo in September 2023. So when today in Bosnia or between Kosovo and Serbia and in some other parts, we have a same amount of conflictuous energies and of nationalist rhetorics, etc., etc. I think that points at something utterly went wrong in the last 2 decades since this process of European integration has started. I mean, Croatia and Slovenia are in the European Union. All the other countries are far away. Might be that Montenegro can catch up, but in general, I don't think that the glass is half full. It might have been, or it might be that it was half full on like in the middle of 2000s or something, but now it has started to empty, and it's now rather half empty when it comes to a vision of democratic and prosperous Western Balkans.
Thank you very much. I'm jumping to another topic, which are many questions on the diaspora living in Austria, in Germany, and elsewhere. One question is, what is the diaspora's role in circumventing racist notions, and especially those from the second generation onwards?
Yeah, I mean, look, diaspora is neither good nor bad per se, neither positive nor negative force per se. So diaspora is a mix of different people, identities, pluralities. Some of diaspora member just parted their ways with their home countries. Some of them are living in Germany and Austria, but de facto basically living in Bosnia or Serbia, and through this kind of a transnational ties, entertaining connections and relations and dreaming of their home back home. I think there is no unique definition of diaspora, but what we do have in the Western Balkans and Southeastern Europe, we have a huge and expanding or growing diaspora. So we have the depopulation and migration or brain drain and all these processes going on, intensifying. I mean, Bosnia has lost now almost half of population. The latest statistics for for Kosovo show that there is only 1.5, 1.6 million population. Serbia is losing population. Croatia has lost even more people than since the membership in the European Union. And I think such a small semi-peripheral region of Europe, where you have a mighty and powerful center and economic disparities and inequalities between those parts, that's going to continue producing migration. And here now comes, of course, this kind of a question: what role can diaspora play? Can it be a positive kind of a force in economic, societal terms, in democratic terms, if you wish, or is it a chance or generational lost? And it's neither nor. I think it's quite obvious that in the diaspora we have wonderful and very engaged initiatives. I mean, now look at the Serbian diaspora in almost all cities, big cities of Europe globally. They stand up and protest with those with the fellow citizens of them now marching in Serbia against the Vučić regime, and I think they can contribute a lot. But some others, unfortunately, even do reproduce the matrix of nationalists. Ideologies in the Western Balkans too. So I think there is no unique answer, but there is, of course, a huge potential if this would be properly used by also political structures and by the states in the region, rather than having this kind of a nationalist demographic policies. They could engage into some kind of a meaningful and constructive diaspora policies. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think that was very very interesting also to break up the term again and to define. I think this is very, very important if we discuss with these terms. There is another question, and you can phrase it differently if you find it more easy. The question is, how do you explain the lack of awareness or the widespread denial or avoidance by people in the Western Balkans toward the racism their family members and friends face in so-called Western countries?
This is a huge topic and huge issue. I don't think so, but what I do see is, of course, that I mean, people in the Western Balkans are very much on the receiving end of all possible types of news from Western Europe. So basically, let's say Montenegrins, rather than looking into Bosnia or Macedonia or the immediate neighborhood, they all look into like USA, what's happening in Germany, what's going on somewhere else, and of course, as the European horizon is shifting, and as we see a kind of normalization of racism and xenophobia, and as we see all those authoritarian leaders popping up, I think there is a reflection of it in the Western Balkans too. Sometimes it goes into the direction basically saying, I mean, Europe, I mean, colloquially, Europe was always like the same like we are. So they pretended that they are kind of modern and more developed and sophisticated and avant-garde, but that's actually the same as we have it here too. And that, of course, that's sometimes broken down in personal stories and personal discussions of people, of relatives that, I mean, someone from Serbia might have in Germany, or someone from Bosnia might have in Graz or in Vienna, or someone from Montenegro might have in the United States of America, now that Trump has taken over. And then in this kind of, on the personal level, you have all possible types of, I also hear it quite often. I mean, like Bosnians are famous for jokes. And then, like when Kikl won, friends of mine would call me and say, "Okay, don't worry. Look, we can accept you as a refugee in Bosnia if you are expelled." And then it goes on to all possible topics. So this will be my take, as the question is interestingly framed, and we probably would need to have a bigger conversation on this one.
I was supposing, yes. I think we're gonna end our conversation here. I thank the public for the sheer amount of questions. We could go on and on and on with these discussions. I thank Vedran for his time to speaking so openly, so eagerly about his experiences. Thank you for your perspectives. We had one comment from the public was saying, thank you, Vedran, for sharing. Continue to struggle and help young people and all to understand that nothing is such simple as they told us. I think this summarizes it very, very well. Thank you for your never-ending seek for understanding and giving also a voice to those who got a voice through this book. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Teresa. Thank you, Leah. Thank you all guys for joining. Wish you all the best, and let's continue our fights and struggles. All the best.
Thank you very much.
Keep in touch.